So this is going to be a little bit different because I haven't reported on this in a journalistic sense. Um, but I have done a lot of research. So that being said, I'm going to label it as an opinion piece, but I will also cite my sources throughout the video and if you're interested in the comments. So without further ado, let's talk about algorithms. So I started researching this for a paper in college. But what prompted me to dig into this topic specifically is all the discourse about us being in the age of misinformation and how misinformation poses such a crazy threat to young people and to democracy itself. And hearing that always drove me a little bit crazy because in my head, I'm thinking, well, whose fault is that? Yeah, there's a ton of misinformation, but we're also quite literally in the age of information, you know? You've got everything you could want to know at the very tip of your fingertips. If you're falling for a Facebook post, whose fault is that? You know, come on. Like we've got the tools to counteract misinformation. Um so, let me get my blood pressure down for a second. But that's why I started digging into how algorithms work and the impacts that they pose on us, not just from like a technological standpoint or social media experience standpoint, but also on a broader scale, like psychologically and interestingly, sociologically. So, my opinion still stands a little bit on that, but it has been shaped and I will explain why. Now, there's a kind of nostalgia that's attached to the early days of social media, like those grainy, oversaturated filters with like the rough black trim and uncomfortably close up selfies, blurry food pictures, and bragging rights that came with getting upwards of 40 likes on Instagram. I mean, users would log on to Instagram or Facebook or Twitter and see exactly what they signed up for, which was posts from their friends, families, or followed accounts in chronological order. So, in that way, the early 2000s and 2010s were much simpler times for the social media landscape when engagement signals and algorithms were unfamiliar terms to most users, myself included. However, rapid technological advancements have plunged us into a social media landscape that's kind of unrecognizable from decades prior, with algorithmic dominance basically having snaked its way into every aspect of the social media experience. And so, nostalgia aside, this isn't all bad. You know, with personalized feeds, users don't need to go seek out content that fits their interest. It's kind of presented directly to them. And follower count is no longer the main driver of engagement, you know? Like even smaller creators can now go viral. So, with an algorithmic push, users can more easily discover niche communities or stay updated on current events, become involved in global discussions, and even platform marginalized voices. So, while algorithmic technology does enhance our social media experience in a number of ways, its negative impacts are glaring. You know, it can undermine our access to information by reinforcing bias, by amplifying misinformation, by rewarding harmful content, and ultimately submerging users into digital echo chambers that distort their understandings of reality and each other. Now, despite how it may seem to longtime social media users, the transformation from a following based chronological feed to an algorithmically constructed, personalized timeline didn't happen overnight. True chronological simplicity was probably at its purest between 2004 and 2009, when Facebook and Twitter were still kind of in their infancy, and manually prescribed content was displayed from most to least recent. Then in about 2009 to 2012, we see early algorithms and engagement signals start to emerge, you know, with Facebook's EdgeRank tool, which loosely tracked interactions, and YouTube's What to Watch feature, which offered engagement driven recommendations. But then in 2018, with TikTok's release, I mean, algorithmic dominance was absolutely redefined and solidified. Its For You page is as many, just about everybody I know, at least in my age bracket with a cell phone, understands. The For You page was built entirely on personalized recommendations, and then a following based feed was secondary. So, given this model's success, other platforms followed suit. Instagram rolled out their Explore slash Reels feature. Facebook and YouTube placed a much heavier, more direct emphasis on recommendations and autoplay with the intent of maximizing time that users spent on their platforms. But the user pushback on this hasn't been entirely disregarded. From 2021 to 2024, Instagram and Twitter slash X gave users the option to toggle between following and algorithm based timelines, though algorithms were still default. And then Instagram Threads, which were primarily driven by algorithms, introduced a following option. Also, the European Union's Digital Services Act of 2024 required platforms to offer a non algorithmic option, which sparked a global discussion about transparency and user rights. So, even though privacy concerns remain central to debates about algorithmic ethics, I think psychological and sociological consequences are equally, if not more, urgent. I mean, as we know, social media algorithms are designed to capture and hold users' attention for as long as possible. And this is achieved by amplifying content that triggers engagement. But, and this is crucial, engagement doesn't necessarily indicate agreeance or a positive response. If someone pauses a little bit too long on an influencer's bikini photo, the algorithm clocks that as engagement, even if you don't like it. It's noticing that you're spending more time on this content and it wants you to do that. And unfortunately, women know this probably a little bit too well. But I mean, this is how rage bait spreads so rapidly. Content that provokes moral outrage generates more comments and shares and extended watch time. And I'm also guilty of this when I see something that I'm like, who would ever say that? I'm the first one who's going to go through the comments and look at every single person who's agreeing or arguing, or I'm spending way more time on that than I ever would a video of a kitten in a string. So we start to see sensationalism overtaking responsible reporting and extremism garnering more attention than moderation and misinformation spreading faster than truth. One widely praised feature, I think I praised it kind of earlier back there, of this new digital era is the ability to connect with people from around the world despite geographic, cultural, or even linguistic barriers. So, in theory, you'd think that this would kind of broaden individuals' worldviews and cultivate empathy, curiosity, and kinship. However, I'd argue that the recent domination of algorithmically curated feeds are eroding these effects. This is because algorithms operate on kind of a give a mouse a cookie principle. If a user likes a random post about beaver facts, all of a sudden their feeds become a chaotic parade of beaver edits to trap music. True story. But more consequentially, when users signal their political leanings, whether that's consciously or unconsciously, algorithms gradually introduced more extreme versions of those perspectives. And research shows that this selective exposure leads users to perceive political in-groups and out-groups as more sharply divided than they actually are, which fuels heightened polarization and conflict. So while we do have the ability to interact with diverse perspectives, algorithms narrow rather than expand that exposure by submerging users in ideological echo chambers that are typically way more extreme than what you'd ever encounter in real life. Youth and young adults are especially vulnerable to this. During formative stages of social and cognitive development, selective exposure can harden biases and reject alternate perspectives while lacking any sort of real world context of the issue. And then once users find themselves in online communities that share and shape those views, their perspectives become further entrenched. So, if unchecked, algorithms can fuel extremism, making them quiet but powerful accelerators at the very least. But I think one of the most ironic consequences of algorithmic dominance is its impact on knowledge and curiosity. Never before in human history has information been more abundant or more accessible. Need data on teen tobacco use? There's a CDC report about it. Want to watch a full press conference at the White House? The Washington Post uploaded a transcript an hour ago. Want to study how algorithms spread emotional contagion? There are multiple peer-reviewed articles that are at your fingertips in seconds. But through constant entertainment being fed to us, narrowed content streams, and basically the cultivation of a disinterest in unfamiliar perspectives, many people are losing the desire or even the opportunity in some cases to explore beyond what is fed to them. And I don't want to imply that this is because we are declining intelligence wise as a population. I think it's just a reasonable and predictable response to information overload. To survive the daily bombardment of media messages, all competing for the increasingly valuable commodity of human attention, your mind has to employ filters. And so algorithms kind of willingly fill that filter role, but in doing so, they narrow the scope of what we see. So over time, users become fragmented into ideological neighborhoods where content is familiar, comfortable, and predictable. So this dynamic reinforces the paradox of information access, which basically states that the more information available globally, the more fragmented and isolated individuals tend to become. But despite these significant concerns, I think it would be misguided to declare that algorithms are inherently harmful. I mean, algorithmic technology is powerful, and it's only going to continue to evolve. So recognizing this, the question becomes not how to eliminate algorithms, but how to shape them responsibly. And here's where I'm definitely going to lean into my personal opinion a little bit, but a lot of people argue that media companies have a responsibility to limit harmful or false content. I tend to disagree with that, honestly. I think aggressive moderation risks sliding into censorship and suppressing legitimate expression. Instead, I think media companies should take a more balanced approach that's rooted in transparency. For starters, they could implement content ranking systems that kind of clearly explain why users are being shown what they're being shown, paired with independent oversight of algorithmic practices. Additionally, users, and especially youth, I think need tools to navigate all these new digital realities. Media literacy, I think, should be a required course for middle and high school students, teaching them to recognize bias, evaluate sources, and understand how exactly algorithms shape their feed and what the consequences of that are. I think ultimately addressing algorithmic dominance requires a combination of corporate accountability, regulatory transparency, and of course, public education. And so, with these, among other safeguards in place, I do believe that algorithmic technology can expand rather than restrict our understanding of the world and those in it. Thank you for hanging in there for that. Like I said, a little bit different, a little bit of my opinions, but there's space for that too. This is, like I said earlier on in the channel, this is going to be a little bit of everything. I'm just going to follow my heart going forward. Whatever that may be. So, if I got anything wrong, or if there's anything that I'm misguided on, in anybody's opinion, please let me know. I have thick skin. I hope. Other than that, thank you. And I'll see you later.